The rain in Silver Point doesn't just fall, it performs. Tonight, it was playing a lonely jazz solo against the window of Astor and Cole, each drop a percussive note on the glass. I watched the neon sign from the pharmacy across the street bleed into the puddles, blurring pink and blue into a watercolor wash of a city I was still trying to understand. Inside, a low, mournful saxophone wept through the speakers, a perfect soundtrack for being stood up. I checked my phone for the 7th time. The screen's glow was harsh in the dim, warm light of the bistro. Mark's text from an hour ago still sat there, a monument to my own foolish optimism. So sorry, Cassia, got pinned down in a meeting, going to be late. He wasn't late, he was a no-show. My thumb hovered over the keyboard, a dozen sharp replies fighting for release, but I settled on leaving him on read. It felt like a small, unsatisfying victory. As an urban planning intern, I was used to dealing with delays and excuses, but I'd naively assumed my personal life would be free of bureaucratic nonsense. June, our waitress, drifted over, her expression a careful mix of pity and professional detachment. She was a student, like me, and we bonded over the shared exhaustion of juggling work and classes. Another ginger ale? Cassia. No, I think I'm just going to call it a night, I said, forcing a smile that felt brittle. Thanks, June. She nodded, but instead of bringing the check, she leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that barely carried over the music. There's something you should know. The hostess just told me. Her eyes flickered around the room, which had suddenly seemed to hush. This table. It was booked for you, specifically, but not by your date. I frowned, confused. What are you talking about? June swallowed, her gaze fixed on the heavy oak door of the restaurant. The reservation was made by Dorian Marchese. He booked this table for you. The name meant nothing to me, but it meant something to the room. The couple at the next table stopped talking, their forks frozen halfway to their mouths. The bartender paused his polishing, his rag still. The saxophone on the speaker seemed to take a breath, a chill, entirely separate from the damp night air, snaked its way up my spine. As if summoned by his name, the oak door swung inward, bringing with it a gust of wind that smelled of rain and the nearby harbor. 2 men, built like the concrete pylons that held up the wharf, stepped in first. They wore dark, impeccably tailored suits that couldn't quite hide the bulk of their shoulders. Their eyes swept the room once, cataloging every face, every exit, before they stepped aside. And then he walked in. He was the calm in the center of the storm he'd created. Dorian Marchese, I presumed. He was tall, dressed in a charcoal suit that seemed to absorb the low light of the room. His dark hair was slicked back, glistening with raindrops, but it was his eyes that held me captive. They were a deep, quiet gray, and they didn't just see you, they assessed and weighed you, as if calculating your place in his world. He moved with an unnerving grace, a predator's economy of motion. He walked directly to my table. His men remained by the door, silent sentinels. He didn't ask for permission, didn't offer an introduction. He simply slid out the chair opposite me, its legs hissing softly against the polished floorboards. From the inside pocket of his suit jacket, he produced a single, perfect white camellia. He placed it gently on the center of my empty bread plate. "Tonight," he said, his voice a low, smooth baritone that cut through the silence, "you need someone on your side." A surge of indignation shot through me, hot and sharp. "Excuse me, I have no idea who you are." He ignored my protest, his gaze unwavering. I saw the details, then the fine lines of his black leather gloves, still damp from the rain, the way the cuff of his crisp white shirt was perfectly starched, the quiet confidence in the set of his jaw. He was infuriatingly, undeniably magnetic. Before I could form another coherent, angry thought, A commotion erupted from the bar. A brawny man with tattoos snaking up his neck and over his knuckles shoved his way forward. He was holding up his phone, its screen lit as he live-streamed. "There she is," he bellowed, his voice slurring slightly. "Cassia Reed, the little city hall snitch, thinks she can file some bogus complaint about the Vireo Heights project and get away with it, ruining jobs for honest folks." My blood ran cold. The complaint wasn't bogus. The structural load calculations were falsified. People were in danger. How did this man know? He took another step, raising the glass of amber liquid in his other hand. "Here's what we think of your paperwork, sweetheart." He hurled the drink. Time seemed to warp, the amber liquid arcing through the air in slow motion, but Dorian Marchese moved in real time. With a flick of his wrist, he plucked the linen napkin from the table and held it up. It intercepted the entire splash, the dark fabric instantly soaking up the whiskey. His other hand made a subtle, twisting motion at his side. It was a signal. From the periphery, two figures moved with a surgical precision that was terrifying. A man I'd later know as Milo and a woman named Teresa materialized on either side of the tattooed loudmouth. There was no struggle, no undignified scuffle. One moment he was yelling, the next he was being silently and efficiently propelled towards the back exit, his feet barely touching the ground. Not a single glass was overturned. The entire incident, from the shout to the removal, took less than 10 seconds. Dorian calmly folded the soaked napkin and placed it on the table. He looked at me, his expression unreadable. My heart was hammering against my ribs. "I don't need you," I managed to say, the words tight in my throat. He gestured almost lazily toward my phone, which I was still clutching in a white-knuckled grip. "You need the data on that phone," he said, his voice dropping again. "And you need your life, which you put in jeopardy the moment you filed that report." As if on cue, my phone vibrated in my hand. The screen lit up with a new message from an unknown number. "Withdraw the report, or we withdraw your next breath. Black Harbor Syndicate." The name hit me like a physical blow. The Black Harbor Syndicate wasn't just some street gang. They were the reason half the city's construction unions paid for protection. They were ruthless, violent, and deep in the city's foundations. The blood drained from my face, and the phone suddenly felt like a block of ice in my palm. Dorian watched the wave of fear wash over me. "Have dinner with me, Miss Reed," he offered, the politeness a stark contrast to the situation. "Let me explain why you've been targeted." My first instinct was to run, to get up, walk out the door, and disappear into the rainy night, but as I glanced toward the front window, my escape route vanished. Parked directly across the street, half swallowed by the shadows, was a large, black utility truck. It had no license plates, its lights were off, its engine silent. It was a predator, waiting. I slowly lowered myself back into my chair, my throat too dry to speak. I just nodded. A silent signal passed from Dorian to June, and a few minutes later, 2 plates of seared scallops were placed before us. The rhythm of the restaurant attempted to return to normal, but the tension was a palpable thing, clinging to the air like humidity. As I picked up my fork, my fingers brushed against the underside of the table. Cold steel. My breath hitched. I slid my hand along the polished wood and felt it the hilt of a knife, held in place with a strip of thick tape, a trap. Not for him, for me. Someone had planted it here, waiting for the right moment. Before my mind could even process the implication, Dorian's gloved hand covered mine, his touch surprisingly gentle but firm. He leaned forward slightly. "Allow me," he murmured. With his other hand, he reached under the table and smoothly detached the weapon. He placed it next to his plate, a steak knife with a serrated edge that glinted in the candlelight. He'd known it was there. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the back of the restaurant, followed by the sound of shattering glass. A plume of acrid, gray smoke began to billow out from the kitchen doors. People started coughing, shouting in alarm. Dorian was on his feet in an instant. He shrugged off his heavy suit jacket and draped it over my shoulders. The wool was warm and smelled faintly of rain and expensive cologne. "This way," he commanded, his hand firm on the small of my back. He didn't guide me toward the chaos of the front door, but toward a discreet side passage marked staff only. He led me through a narrow hallway and down a flight of steep wooden stairs into a cool, cavernous wine cellar. The air was thick with the scent of old oak and damp earth. He stopped in front of a heavy steel door, the kind you'd find in a bank vault. As he worked the combination lock, I could hear the panicked shouts and the first wail of sirens from above. Just before he pulled the heavy door shut, sealing us in near total darkness, he paused and glanced back up toward the ceiling of the cellar. His eyes found a small, red sprinkler head nestled among the pipes. "Tonight," he said, his voice echoing slightly in the confined space, "they were testing your reactions." I swallowed hard, the reality of the past 30 minutes crashing down on me. I was standing in a dark cellar with the city's most dangerous man, while upstairs, a trap laid for me had turned into a full-blown attack. My voice was barely a whisper when I replied. "And you," I said, meeting his intense gray eyes in the gloom, "are testing my trust." The heavy steel door clicked shut, plunging us into a darkness so complete it felt like a physical weight. For a moment, the only sounds were my own ragged breathing and the frantic thumping of my heart. The distant wail of sirens was a muffled cry from another world. A second click, and a single low-wattage bulb flickered on, casting long, distorted shadows of wine racks across the stone floor. Dorian Marchese stood by the door, his face a mask of shadows and light, his gray eyes fixed on mine. My trust, he was demanding it, and I didn't even know what currency it was traded in. "Who are they?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. My jacket, his jacket, was a heavy comfort around my shoulders. The man at the bar, the smoke, the knife. "Who wants me hurt?" "The people you reported," he answered simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. He moved away from the door, walking between the racks of sleeping bottles. "The Black Harbor Syndicate?" "How do you know about the report?" My mind was racing. It was supposed to be anonymous, filed through a secure portal. "My business is the docks. Miss Reed, the Marlin Circle keeps Silver Point's harbor running. I make it my business to know about every major construction project, every union dispute, and every whispered threat that echoes over the water. And Vireo Heights is the biggest project the city has seen in a decade." I took a breath, the cool, musty air filling my lungs. He was waiting. He had saved me, and now he was waiting for the explanation he already seemed to know. So I gave it to him. "I'm an intern at SPHA, the Silver Point Housing and Livability Authority," I began, the bureaucratic name sounding hollow and useless now. "My job is mostly grunt work, filing permits, cross-referencing blueprints. A few weeks ago, I was assigned to the Vireo Heights residential tower. I found a discrepancy. The architectural plans for the load-bearing columns didn't match the materials manifest. The specs called for high-tensile steel rebar. The manifest showed they were using a cheaper, lower-grade composite." He stopped his pacing and turned to face me, his expression unreadable. "A cost-cutting measure." "It's more than that," I insisted, the frustration and fear of the past weeks bubbling to the surface. "It's criminal. The building is 30 stories of residential housing. To hide the change, they falsified the load-bearing maps and the pressure test results. I found the original files buried on a legacy server. Then I found the live sensor data from the strain gauges embedded in the concrete. The 5th floor slab, the one supporting the public gym and swimming pool, is already showing signs of micro-fracturing. It's under immense stress. It's not a matter of if it will fail, but when. And the project is funded by Slate Horizon, Gideon Slate's foundation." I said the name and watched for a reaction. There was none. Just a quiet intensity in his eyes. He's a billionaire philanthropist. The whole city sees him as a saint, rebuilding the old industrial sectors. But the primary contractor on site, the one actually pouring the concrete and signing off on the inspections, is a shell corporation. It traces back to the Black Harbor Syndicate, to a woman named Irina Volkova. And you sent this information to the FIB? It wasn't a question. I nodded. Everything. The original blueprints, the forged documents, the live sensor data. I sent it 3 days ago. I haven't heard a word. It's like I sent it into a black hole. My voice trembled slightly. Then tonight, Mark was supposed to meet me, the man I was seeing. I looked down at my phone, the betrayal stinging fresh and sharp. He works in PR for Slate Horizon. I told him I was nervous about a work project. I didn't give him details, but he must have put it together. He wasn't late. He set me up, didn't he? He was getting me in position so they could get my phone. Mark was the lure. The man at the bar was the public warning. The knife was for if you didn't take the hint, Dorian said, his voice devoid of emotion. Black Harbor doesn't like loose ends. He walked to a dusty crate and retrieved a bottle and 2 small glasses. He poured a finger of dark amber liquid into each. My turn, he said, handing me a glass. The liquor was strong, and the warmth that spread through my chest was a welcome anchor in the swirling chaos. The Marlin Circle is in a period of transition, he began, swirling the liquid in his glass. My father ran these docks with an iron fist. I prefer a steady hand. We are moving our operations into legitimate logistics shipping, warehousing, transport. To do that, I need stability. I need a predictable market. He took a small sip. Irina Volkova and the Black Harbor Syndicate are the opposite of predictable. They undercut our contracts with non-union labor. They intimidate our workers. They flood the piers with their contraband. They are a cancer, and Gideon Slate is giving them the money and legitimacy to metastasize. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded, large-format piece of paper. He spread it out on top of a wine barrel. It was a photograph, but it looked like a still from a disaster movie. A building, clearly Vireo Heights, had pancaked, its floors collapsing onto one another in a horrifying cascade of concrete and steel. Rendered figures of emergency workers swarmed the rubble. It was a highly detailed, professionally done disaster simulation. This is Slate's endgame, Dorian said, his voice low and cold. Vireo Heights collapses. It's a tragedy. Hundreds of working-class families are displaced, or worse, the city mourns, and then Gideon Slate, the philanthropist, steps in. He clears the rubble, fast-tracks a new luxury redevelopment project on the now vacant land, and washes millions of syndicate dollars through the construction contracts. He becomes a hero, and Irina's organization becomes untouchable. A wave of nausea washed over me. It was monstrous. It was unthinkable. And it was suddenly, terrifyingly real. A memory surfaced, sharp and jarring. They wouldn't let me on site, I whispered, staring at the horrific image. 2 weeks ago, I tried to do a spot check. I was stopped at the gate by private security. They were polite but firm, said it was a closed site. Their uniforms. I looked up at him, the pieces clicking into place. They said Moru, Metro Organized Response Unit. A fictitious entity, Dorian confirmed. A private army funded by Slate to keep prying eyes out. They answer only to him. He folded the simulation photo and tucked it away. The single bulb above us seemed to flicker. For the first time, I felt the true scale of what I had stumbled into. It wasn't just a corrupt contractor. It was a conspiracy that reached from the city's glittering penthouses to its darkest alleys. I need that data, Miss Reed, Dorian said, his gaze locking with mine. The raw, uncorrupted sensor feed. It's the only thing that proves the danger is imminent. It's the only thing that can stop them before they decide to accelerate the timeline. What are you proposing? I asked, my voice barely audible. An exchange, a partnership of necessity, he stated. You are a target now. Everywhere you go, they will be watching. I can provide you with protection. The Marlin Circle will make it publicly known that you are under our care. An attack on you becomes an attack on me, and that is a war even Irina Volkova is not eager to start. In return, you will get me inside Vireo Heights. You will lead me to that sensor control station in the basement so my people can make a copy of the data before their IT people wipe it for good. I recoiled. Rely on the Mafia, become a pawn in a war between two criminal empires. Everything in me screamed no. I was a city planner. I believed in regulations, in oversight, in the system. The system was failing. But the thought of turning to a man like Dorian Marchesi felt like a betrayal of everything I stood for. I can't, I said, shaking my head. I can't work with you. Can you work without me? He countered, his voice calm, reasonable, and utterly ruthless. Can you survive the night? Before I could answer, there was a soft, scraping sound at the heavy steel door. My body went rigid. Dorian didn't flinch. He walked to the door, listened for a moment, and then slid back the heavy bolts. It was June. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with fear, but she was holding my small leather wallet in her hand. "Cassia," she breathed, rushing over to me. "You dropped this when he pulled you away. I'm so sorry, this is all so crazy." "It's okay, June, thank you," I said, taking the wallet. My hands were shaking. "That's not all," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "During all the smoke and screaming, a bike messenger came in. He said he had a delivery for the woman at the window table. He gave me this and left before I could even say anything." She held out a small, stiff rectangle of ivory cardstock. It was heavy, expensive. I took it from her. It wasn't an envelope. It was a single card, like an invitation. Embossed on the front in elegant, curling black script were 2 lines. A name, Cassia Reed, and beneath it a date, October 26th, 4 days from now. It was a funeral card. I stared at it, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. This was a message, a death sentence, delivered with all the formal etiquette of a high society event. Dorian looked over my shoulder at the card. His expression didn't change, but a new hardness settled in his eyes. "They've already scheduled your funeral, Miss Reed," he said quietly. The choice was gone. The debate between my principles and my survival was over. There was no system to save me. There was only the man standing beside me and the monsters waiting outside. I closed my hand, crumpling the card in my fist. I looked up at Dorian Marchesi, the crime lord, the head of the Marlin Circle, my only and last hope. "Let's go," I said. We didn't use the front door. A passage from the back of the wine cellar led to a narrow, rain-lashed alley where a car was waiting, engine purring so quietly it was almost inaudible. It wasn't a flashy limousine, but a long, black sedan that seemed to drink the darkness around it, the Raven Sable. Dorian had called it. There were no markings, no license plates, nothing to give it an identity. It was a ghost on wheels. Milo held the rear door open, and I slid onto the cool leather seat. Dorian followed, settling beside me with an unnerving lack of wasted motion. The door closed with a solid, definitive thud, sealing us in a world of silence, leather and the faint, clean scent of ozone from the rain. Teresa was in the passenger seat, a silhouette against the dashboard's low glow, while Milo took the wheel. He pulled away from the curb so smoothly it felt like we were floating. The chaos of Astor and Cole, the sirens, the smoke vanished behind us as we merged into the slick, empty streets of the Salt Line District. The rain washed over the windows, transforming the sodium streetlights into long, golden brushstrokes against the glass. It was like driving through an impressionist painting of a city drowning. Inside the car, the silence was thick with discipline. I watched them, trying to understand the dynamics. They didn't use names. When Dorian gave a quiet instruction about our route, he addressed Milo as Anchor. A moment later, Teresa. Beacon reported on traffic scanner chatter with clipped efficiency. Dorian, I gathered, was Helm. It was the language of a ship's crew, precise and hierarchical. This was not the chaotic mob I'd pictured from movies. It was an organization, as structured and purposeful as the city grid I spent my days studying. "Don't worry," a voice next to me said, breaking the silence. It was Teresa, looking back from the passenger seat. She had a wry, knowing smile. "Helm's the best driver in the city, except for me, of course." I offered a weak smile in return, the casual joke, the easy confidence, was so at odds with the life-or-death situation that it somehow managed to cut through a layer of my fear. It made the terror manageable. "I'll try to remember that," I said. As we neared the skeletal silhouette of Vireo Heights, a different kind of light cut through the rain, the harsh, sweeping beams of floodlights. A makeshift checkpoint blocked the main access road. 2 white SUVs with the bold, blue Moru logo emblazoned on their sides were parked at an angle, and several guards in tactical gear patrolled the perimeter, their faces grim and shadowed under their caps. Milo slowed the car to a crawl, stopping a block away. "They've locked it down tight, Helm." Dorian didn't seem surprised. He simply stared at the blockade for a long moment. His fingers steepled in front of his lips, then a ghost of a smile touched his mouth. He took out his phone and made a call. "Rook Helm," he said, his voice low. "The flock is hungry. How's your special tonight?" He listened for a moment. "Perfect. Bring the whole truck. Gate B. 'Cause a little indigestion on your way in." He hung up. Less than 5 minutes later, a brightly lit food truck, emblazoned with a cartoon rooster holding a taco, came rumbling down a side street. "Rook's Roost," it proclaimed in cheerful, looping script. It barreled toward the checkpoint, horn blaring a jaunty tune. The Moru guards, startled, moved to intercept it. The driver, a large man I could only assume was Rook, leaned out the window, shouting apologetically about a brake malfunction. The truck swerved, knocking over a barrier with a loud clang, creating the perfect, chaotic diversion. "Now," Dorian said quietly. Milo didn't need to be told twice. He put the car in gear and glided down a dark, narrow service alley on the opposite side of the construction site. We parked behind a row of overflowing dumpsters. "Beacon, you have watch," Dorian commanded. "Anchor, you're with us." We moved quickly through the rain, sticking to the deepest shadows. Milo led the way to a small, grated panel set low in the building's concrete foundation, a maintenance shaft I recognized from the blueprints. He produced a set of tools and had it open in seconds. The air that wafted out was cool and damp, smelling of wet concrete and earth. "It's a tight squeeze," Milo grunted, shining a penlight into the darkness. He went first, and I followed, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The shaft was narrow and cold, the metal rungs of the service ladder biting into my hands. Below, the rhythmic plink, plink, plink of water dripping from a pipe echoed in the oppressive silence. It sounded like a clock, counting down the seconds we didn't have. We emerged into the sub-basement. It was a cavern of concrete pillars and exposed ductwork, the air thick with humidity. The dripping sound was louder here, a constant, maddening metronome. I led them through the labyrinthine corridors, my mind's eye tracing the blueprints I had spent weeks memorizing. Finally, we reached a locked door marked System Controls. This was my part. I pulled 2 thin pieces of metal tension wrench and pick from the wallet June had returned to me, a skill my lockpicking enthusiast of a college roommate had insisted I learn. My hands were shaking, but the familiar feel of the pins and tumblers was a small, steadying comfort. After a few tense seconds, I felt the final pin click into place. The lock turned. The control room was small, filled with humming server racks. Along one wall was the panel I was looking for. I keyed in my SPHA access code, and the screen flickered to life, displaying a schematic of the building's support structure. And there it was, a cascade of angry, flashing red numbers. The strain gauge data was even worse than when I'd last seen it. The readings on the 5th floor slab were critical. A bright red warning box pulsed on the screen. Imminent deflection failure risk. "It's going to go," I whispered, a cold dread seeping into my bones. "Soon." "Get the data, anchor," Dorian ordered. Milo was already at my side, plugging a slim black hard drive into the panel's service port. A progress bar appeared on the screen, crawling from left to right with agonizing slowness. Every drip of water in the hallway felt like a hammer blow. And then a new sound cut through the quiet, the shrill, electronic shriek of an alarm. "Perimeter breach, sub-level B," a tinny, automated voice announced from a speaker on the ceiling. Milo swore under his breath. "They're running thermal sweeps. They've got us." The progress bar was only at 70%. Footsteps, heavy and fast, pounded in the hallway outside. "We need more time," Milo gritted out. Dorian's face was calm, decisive. He looked at me, and in his eyes, I saw not a flicker of panic. "Keep it running," he said to Milo. Then his gaze settled on me. "Stay here. Don't move." I opened my mouth to protest. "You can't just go out there," but he silenced me with a look. It wasn't a command, it was a reassurance, a silent promise that he had this under control. He walked to the door, opened it just a crack, and then stepped out into the hallway, pulling it almost shut behind him. I watched through the narrow gap. My breath held tight in my chest. A team of 4 Moru guards rounded the corner, rifles raised. Their commander, a man with a square jaw and cold eyes, barked, "Hold it right there, hands where I can see them." Dorian didn't raise his hands. He kept them tucked casually behind his back, a posture of non-threatening authority. He even smiled faintly. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice calm and conversational, as if he'd merely encountered them on a leisurely stroll. "I was just inspecting your site. I must say, I'm a little concerned." The commander took a step forward, his weapon still trained on Dorian's chest. "You're trespassing on a restricted site." "Am I?" Dorian tilted his head. "I thought this was a publicly funded SPHA project. According to OSHA Regulation 1926.21b2, safety and health training programs must be made available to any concerned parties. I'm a concerned party." He paused. "For instance, I noticed a distinct lack of proper emergency exit lighting in this corridor. That's a clear violation of Subpart K, Section 404, and I'm fairly certain your temporary wiring over there isn't up to code." The commander was momentarily stunned into silence. It was the last thing he expected, and in that moment, I understood. Dorian wasn't just a mob boss. He was a student of the system he operated outside of. He knew the rules, the regulations, the bureaucracy. He was using their own playbook to tie them in knots, buying us precious seconds with red tape. "Copy complete," Milo whispered from beside me. He unplugged the drive. Just as the Moru commander found his voice again, Milo grabbed my arm. "This way, move!" He pulled me toward a heavy maintenance hatch in the floor, a trash chute. He wrenched it open, revealing a dark, vertical tunnel. "Up we go!" We scrambled inside, the metal cold and slick. We climbed, pulling ourselves up on internal rungs as the shouts from the hallway grew more frantic. We emerged onto the roof, gasping for air, the wind and rain hitting us like a physical blow. The city spread out below us, a glittering, rain-blurred tapestry. I took a step back, my foot landing on a loose piece of gravel. My ankle twisted. For a horrifying, weightless second, I was falling, the world tilting sideways, the edge of the roof rushing toward me. A scream caught in my throat. An arm like a steel band wrapped around my waist, yanking me back from the brink with a force that knocked the wind out of me. I slammed into Dorian's chest. He had followed us up the chute. His body was a solid wall of warmth and strength against the storm. My heart hammered against his, a wild, terrified bird in a cage. A brilliant fork of lightning split the sky, illuminating his face for a split second. We were hidden under the scant cover of a ventilation unit's overhang, our faces inches apart. The rain plastered his hair to his forehead, and a single drop trickled down his temple. I could feel the heat of his breath, warm against the cold rain on my skin. His gray eyes bored into mine, and in their depths, I saw the entire, violent, beautiful, terrifying city reflected. He held me there, his grip unyielding, his body shielding mine. He leaned closer, and I thought he was going to kiss me. I think I wanted him to. The world had dissolved into this single, charged moment, the storm above, the city below, and the man holding me together. But he stopped, his forehead resting against mine. His voice was a low rumble, barely audible over the wind. "Live first," he whispered. then love. He released me, his hand moving from my waist to my arm, his touch now steadying instead of possessive. "The fire escape is on the north side," he said, his voice back to its commanding calm. And together, with the data that could save a building and ruin an empire clutched in Milo's hand, we ran across the storm-swept roof and disappeared into the night. The fire escape stairs were slick with rain, each metal step a potential betrayal. We descended into another anonymous alley, another waiting ghost car. This time, the silence inside was different. The adrenaline of the heist had been replaced by a low, humming exhaustion. My hands wouldn't stop trembling, a delayed reaction to the fall I hadn't taken, the danger I had only just outrun. We drove for what felt like an hour, leaving the city's concrete heart behind for the salt-scoured periphery of the docks. Milo pulled the car into a cavernous, dark building that smelled of brine and old timber, Eider Warehouse. Inside, a few bare bulbs cast a lonely yellow glow over a vast, open space. It was Spartan, furnished with little more than a worn leather sofa, a scarred wooden table, and a few mismatched chairs. Teresa led me to one of them, her sharp eyes softening as she saw the shaking in my hands. "You've got a scrape," she said, her voice unexpectedly gentle. She knelt and opened a first aid kit, cleaning the raw patch on my palm where I'd braced myself on the roof's gravel. Her touch was efficient and impersonal, yet oddly comforting. When she finished, she gave my hand a brief, firm squeeze. "You were brave up there," she murmured, then stood and nodded once toward Dorian before melting back into the shadows with Milo, leaving us in a pool of quiet privacy. The trembling intensified, a full body tremor I couldn't control. The shock was finally setting in, a tidal wave of delayed fear. My teeth began to chatter. Dorian moved from the shadows without a sound. He didn't speak, didn't offer empty platitudes. He went to a small kitchenette in the corner and, a few minutes later, returned with a steaming mug that smelled richly of chocolate. He pressed it into my hands. The warmth seeped into my fingers, a small but potent anchor. He also draped a thick, heavy wool sweater over my shoulders. It was soft and smelled of cedar. He sat in the chair across from me, watching me with those unnervingly perceptive gray eyes. He let the silence stretch, giving me space to breathe, to find my footing. Finally, he reached into an old canvas satchel by his chair and pulled out not a weapon or a file, but a book, a worn, leather-bound sketchbook. He slid it across the table toward me. Hesitantly, I opened it. The pages were filled with architectural drawings, rendered with a skill and passion that took my breath away. There were detailed sketches of bridge trusses, cross-sections of vaulted ceilings, and elegant sweeping designs for public spaces. The handwriting in the margins was his, analyzing stress points, noting the play of light and shadow. It was the work of someone who didn't just see buildings, but understood their souls. "You were an architect," I whispered, looking up at him in disbelief. "I was a student," he corrected softly, "a lifetime ago, before my father died and the family business became my responsibility. It changed everything. His calculated takedown of the Moru guards, his knowledge of OSHA codes, his intrinsic understanding of Vireo Heights' fatal flaw. It wasn't just intelligence gathered by a crime boss. It was the ghost of a different life, a different man. He wasn't just trying to conquer a piece of the city. He was trying to keep it from falling down. "I want to build things, not break them," he said, as if reading my thoughts. "I want to turn the Marlin Circle into something that lasts, a vocational center on the docks, training for the kids who see no other options, a legitimate enterprise. But for that to happen, Silver Point needs to be stable. It can't be the playground of men like Gideon Slate." The confession hung in the air between us, raw and vulnerable. It made me feel brave enough for one of my own. "I feel so stupid," I admitted, my voice thick, "about tonight, sitting at that table, waiting for a man who is setting me up, all dressed up, feeling hopeful. It's pathetic. It was a fortunate accident, not, he countered, his voice firm. If Mark hadn't stood you up, if you had left that restaurant on time, my men wouldn't have been in position. Black Harbor would have reached you in the street, and we wouldn't be having this conversation. His reframing of my humiliation didn't just soothe the sting, it wove it into the fabric of our story, making it a necessary, pivotal event. The rain began to fall harder, drumming a steady, hypnotic rhythm on the warehouse's corrugated roof. He moved his chair closer to mine, and we sat in silence for a long time, listening to the storm, the warmth from the cocoa spreading through me. Our hands were resting on the table, inches apart, tentatively. I felt my fingers uncurl. My hand moved, closing the small gap between us until the back of my fingers brushed against his. He didn't pull away. A current, quiet but undeniable, passed between us. The air grew thick, emboldened. I turned my hand and gently placed my palm over his. His skin was warm. My thumb brushed against a raised, jagged line on the inside of his wrist, a scar, old and white. I didn't ask about it. I just held his hand, accepting that this man of sketches and blueprints was also a man of violence and scars. It was all part of the same whole. He turned his hand, his fingers lacing through mine. He stood, gently pulling me to my feet. He didn't pull me into a rough embrace. He simply stood before me, his eyes searching mine, asking a question without words. Slowly, he lowered his head. The first touch of his lips was impossibly soft, a breath of warmth against the chill of the night. It was a kiss of questions, of discovery. It deepened slowly, a deliberate, unhurried exploration that spoke of patience and control. It was overwhelming and grounding all at once, just as the warmth began to build into a fire. He pulled back, resting his forehead against mine. His lips were still hot, inches from my own. "I will not take your choices from you, Cassia," he whispered, his voice rough with an emotion he was holding in check. "Not now, not ever." He was giving me the power, the agency that had been stolen from me all night. The choice was mine, and my choice was to lean into him, to rest my head against the solid wall of his chest. I could hear the steady, powerful beat of his heart beneath my ear. Thump, 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 thump. It was the most stable, reliable thing I had felt all day. The rhythm was a promise, and slowly, the last of my fear dissolved into the sound. A sharp vibration broke the spell. It was my phone, buzzing insistently on the table. With a sigh, I pulled away and answered it. It was June. "Cassia, thank God," she said, her voice a panicked rush. "That guy from the bar, the one who live-streamed his video, is everywhere. He's claiming you're a disgruntled intern trying to sabotage the Vireo project because you got fired. It's trending. And, oh God, Cassia." Slate Horizon just released a statement. They're offering to fund a full structural renovation and beautification project for the building as a gesture of goodwill, effective immediately. They're trying to buy everyone's silence. The blood drained from my face. They weren't just trying to kill me. They were trying to erase me, to paint me as a villain and themselves as saviors. I relayed the information to Dorian. He listened, his jaw tightening. He gently took the phone from my hand and ended the call. Then he reached up and brushed a stray strand of hair from my forehead, his touch feather light. "How do you want to fight this?" he asked, his voice low, "publicly, and risk them twisting your words, or from the shadows, where we have the advantage?" A new fire ignited in my chest, burning away the last vestiges of the victim I had been. "Both," I said, my voice clear and strong. My eyes met his, and I knew he saw the shift in me. He nodded, a flicker of something like pride in his eyes. The tension between us returned, but this time it was different. It wasn't just attraction. It was the sharp electric hum of two people bound by a shared purpose, a shared enemy. He stepped closer, his hands coming up to cup my face. This time, the kiss was not a question. It was an answer. It was more desperate. fueled by the fresh wave of injustice and the ticking clock. Our hands tightened their grip on each other, my fingers digging into the thick wool of his sweater, his pulling me closer until there was no space left between us. My breath hitched as his lips moved from mine to my jaw, his breathing ragged against my skin. The carefully constructed walls around my heart cracked, a door opening to a possibility I hadn't dared to imagine. We were still on this side of the line, but we were walking right up to the edge. Suddenly, a pair of brilliant white headlights swept across the grimy warehouse windows, slicing through the darkness and throwing our shadows into stark relief against the far wall. Instantly, Dorian's body went rigid, in one fluid motion. He spun me around, pressing me back against the cold timber of the wall and shielding me with his own body. It was a solid, immovable shield. We stood frozen, wrapped in darkness and each other, as the car idled outside for a long, agonizing minute. The engine growled, the sound of hunters circling. Then, with a squeal of tires on wet pavement, it sped away. He didn't move for a full minute after the sound faded, his body still covering mine, his head bent low, listening. The word was still unspoken. It had no place here. Not yet. But it was in the way he held me. A silent, desperate vow in the darkness of a lonely warehouse by the sea. The fragile intimacy of the night before, balanced on the edge of a kiss and the barrel of a gun, felt 1,000 miles away. Daylight brought a different kind of cold, the harsh, gray reality of what we were up against. Dorian's protection wasn't a passive shield. It was an active deployment. By 10 a.m., I was no longer Cassia Reed, trembling intern. I was a geotechnical surveyor, complete with a clipboard, a hard hat, and Teresa. She had transformed. Her dark, tactical gear was gone, replaced by a fluorescent yellow vest over a plain work shirt and steel-toed boots. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, no-nonsense ponytail. She looked impatient, professional, and utterly bored, the perfect disguise. Our destination was Harbor Finch, a cluster of low-rise, prefabricated apartment buildings wedged between a container yard and the freeway. It wasn't a community, it was a holding pen. The place SPHA had dumped the Vireo Heights residents during the structural integrity checks weeks before the sensor data ever crossed my desk. "You do the talking," Teresa murmured as we walked past a rusted playground, her eyes scanning the balconies above. "You sound like you care. I'm just here to check the soil stability. Keep it moving. We look like we're on a clock. People won't ask questions." She was right. Residents eyed us with suspicion, their faces drawn with the anxiety of displacement. But a woman in a SPHA-branded vest, one Milo had acquired for me, and a clipboard was a familiar, if unwelcome, sight. I approached a small group of women sitting on a concrete bench, sharing a thermos of coffee. "Excuse me," I said, forcing a professional, detached tone. "Cassia Reed, SPHA. We're just doing some follow-up soil analysis for the displacement report." They stared at me with dead eyes. "You SPHA people," one of them spat, her voice thick with resentment. "You come, you check your boxes, and you leave." "I know this is difficult," I said, softening my voice, leaning in. "We're trying to figure out the timeline for your return." This got a reaction. A younger woman named Maria, balancing a toddler on her hip, spoke up. "Return. They told us last week it might be indefinite. That's what the man from Slate Horizon said, after he promised us the beautification project. We don't want beautification. We want to go home." "Were there problems?" I asked, keeping my pen poised over the clipboard. "Before they moved you?" Maria nodded vigorously. "Problems for weeks. It sounded like the building was groaning. At night, like thunder, but trapped in the walls. We reported it, over and over. We called SPHA. We called the management company." "And what did they do?" I asked, my blood running cold. "They sent a man," she said. "He walked around for 10 minutes, looked at a crack in the lobby, and signed a paper. Said it was cosmetic settling. He posted it on the community board." "Do you still have that paper?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. An older woman, who I learned was Mrs. Petrov. Her face a roadmap of wrinkles, pushed herself up from the bench. I have it. I don't trust them. I don't trust any of you. But I kept it. She led me to her small, cramped unit, the walls thin as paper. The air smelled of boiled cabbage and old grief. From a shoebox filled with important documents, a passport, birth certificates, a social security card, she pulled a folded, photocopied piece of paper. It was a standard SPHA inspection waiver, dated 6 weeks ago. It declared Vireo Heights structurally sound and fully up to occupancy standards, citing minor cosmetic settling. And at the bottom, a flowing, confident signature. Arthur McKinley, lead structural engineer. I stared at the name, my hand tightening on my clipboard. Arthur McKinley, I said, the name catching in my throat. I know that name. He won the Silver Point Engineering Prize 5 years ago. See, Mrs., Petrov said, her voice sharp with misplaced pride. He was the best. Mrs. Petrov, I said, meeting her gaze. Arthur McKinley died of a heart attack 2 years ago. The color drained from her face. It wasn't just a mistake. It wasn't negligence. It was systemic. Calculated fraud. They had used a dead man's reputation to sign a death warrant for an entire building. Teresa, who'd been standing guard at the door, put a hand on my arm. We got what we came for. Time to go. We met Dorian and Milo at a laundromat in the warehouse district, a known neutral ground run by a proprietor loyal to the Marlin Circle. The air was thick with the smell of bleach and warm, humid steam from the industrial dryers. It was a bizarrely domestic setting for a war council. We sat on plastic chairs near the folding tables, the rumble of the machines providing a low, steady white noise. I laid the forged inspection sheet on the table. They used a dead man, Dorian. He examined the signature, his expression hardening. They're arrogant and desperate. They never expected anyone to dig this deep. He then shared his own findings. I spent the morning at St. Meritorne's. Father Silvio keeps the city's real archives, not the political ones, but the humanitarian ones. Records of every charitable donation, every relief shipment that has come through the docks for 50 years. And Slate Horizon, I asked. A long history of suspicious generosity, Dorian said, his voice a low rumble beneath the dryers. Massive donations of medical supplies and building materials to disaster zones, filed through his foundation. But the shipping manifests, the ones Silvio has, show the containers were half empty or filled with substandard goods. The value was inflated on paper. Slate wasn't just planning to launder money through Vireo's reconstruction. He's been using philanthropy as a wash cycle for years. The pieces began to click together in my head, forming a terrifying, logical picture. The rumbling noises, the evacuation before I even filed my report, Slate's immediate, generous offer to renovate. My God, I whispered, looking from Dorian to the forged paper. The migration plan. That's what they called it internally at SPHA. I saw the email headers. I thought it was just a bureaucratic name for the temporary move. Dorian nodded, his eyes dark. They weren't trying to kill the residents in a collapse. Not all of them, anyway. That's too messy, too unpredictable. They were scaring them. The noises, the cracks, the manufactured instability. They planned to move everyone out, declare the building unsafe before it fell, and then perform a controlled demolition. A controlled demolition, I repeated, the horror of it settling in my stomach like cold lead. He gets to play the hero, saving them from a potential disaster. He gets the city's gratitude, tax breaks for the new project, and the insurance payout, and the entire community. The people from Harbor Finch are permanently displaced. He gets the land for pennies. And Irina Volkova gets the contracts to build his new luxury towers, Dorian finished. A new, hot anger burned through me. This wasn't just about data and blueprints anymore. It was about Mrs. Petrov. It was about Maria and her child. We have to stop them. We have to go public. I can go live right now. Show this forged signature. Tell them what Arthur McKinley... No, Dorian's voice was sharp, cutting through my impassioned plea. What do you mean? No. I stood up, my voice rising. We have proof. You have a photocopy of a dead man's signature, he countered, his voice lethally calm. Within an hour, Slate's PR team will call you a disgruntled, unstable intern. They'll produce a real Arthur McKinley, a cousin with the same name, who will swear he signed it. They will bury you in plausible deniability. You are not fighting a contractor, Cassia. You are fighting a narrative. So what do we do? Nothing, I demanded, frustrated. We do what they are doing. We aim for the foundation, he said. We need proof that is absolute, irreversible. We need the original, digitally signed blueprints from before they were altered. We need the internal memos that authorize the change. We need the money trail from Slate to the shell company. We need to get inside the brain of their operation. The Slate vault, Milo said quietly from the corner, where he'd been working on a laptop. It's what they call their central server. It's not just a server, it's a physical vault in the sub-basement of the Slate Horizon Tower. Biometric, seismic sensors, the works. Then that's our target, I said, my voice hardening with a resolve that surprised me. Helm, Milo interrupted, his face grim. There's a complication. Our friend at the FIB, the one who was supposed to be looking into Cassia's report, he's gone dark. I've been running traces. Slate's money isn't just in construction, it's deep in the bureau. The whole network we were counting on is compromised. A heavy silence fell over the laundromat, broken only by the rhythmic tumble of drying clothes, the one official channel I had trusted. The entire reason I had filed the report was a dead end. Not the whole network, Milo continued, tapping a key. There's one name that keeps popping up on the outside. Agent Lara Quinn. She's been building a quiet case on Slate's financial dealings for a year, but she's been isolated, transferred to white-collar cases that go nowhere. She's clean, but she's alone. I looked at Dorian. This was the true test. He ran an empire based on bypassing the law, on existing in the shadows the law created. Trusting a federal agent was anathema to him. It meant crossing a line he had spent his life defending. He watched the tumbling clothes for a long, silent moment. I could almost see the calculations turning in his mind, the delicate balance between his code and his objective. He was walking a high wire, trying to save his harbor without becoming the very thing he was fighting or the system he despised. Then we give the lady an anonymous tip, Dorian said finally, his gaze meeting mine. We're going into the vault. When we come out, Agent Quinn needs to be in a position to catch what we throw her. He stood up, grabbing his jacket. But this is our operation. We control the data. We control the narrative. Just as he finished the sentence, the front glass of the laundromat didn't shatter. It imploded. A wave of frosted pebbles flying inward. A black SUV had slammed to a stop at the curb, and Moru operatives, this time in full tactical gear, were pouring out. They tracked us, Teresa yelled, drawing a weapon from the small of her back. Dorian didn't hesitate. He grabbed me, not by the arm, but by the hand, his grip tight and non-negotiable. Milo, beacon back, exit, go. He pulled me through the chaos of overturned laundry baskets and screaming patrons. We plunged into a back storage room and slammed through a rear door into a narrow, dark alley. The air was a wall of steam, billowing from the laundromat's massive external vents. It was a disorienting, white-hot fog. This way, he yelled over the hiss of the vents. The alley was a canyon of steam and shadows. The air was so thick with the smell of soap and bleach it coated my tongue. We ran, hand in hand, our footsteps echoing on the wet pavement. We were blind, enveloped in a man-made cloud, with the shouts of our pursuers fading behind us. We didn't stop running until we were blocks away, hearts hammering, covered in the damp, clean scent of the ambush we had barely escaped. The Slate Horizon Tower was a monument to Gideon Slate's ego, a shard of black glass that pierced the Silver Point sky. At 2 a.m., it was a silent monolith, but we were about to give it a migraine. The plan was a delicate piece of clockwork. each of us a gear that had to turn at the perfect time. Teresa was our entry point, dressed in the gray, logo-stitched coveralls of an Apex elevator technician. She walked through the lobby doors with a toolbox and a world-weary sigh that was utterly convincing. She presented a forged work order for an emergency diagnostic on the executive elevator bank, a fault she herself had triggered 10 minutes earlier by spoofing a signal to its control panel. While the skeleton crew of night security was distracted by Teresa's masterful performance of bureaucratic frustration, Milo, Dorian, and I slipped in through a service entrance in the underground parking garage. Milo was a shadow, disappearing almost immediately into the ceiling, heading for the main ventilation trunk. Dorian and I were the oddest part of the ensemble, dressed in jeans, work boots, and matching navy blue jackets with the logo of a non-existent company, Keystone Forensics, stitched on the chest. We looked like contractors, hard hats tucked under our arms. We carried a large, heavy-duty case between us. We were here to assess the building's electrical load issues. We were the problem and the solution, all in one. "Heads up, Helm," Milo's voice crackled, impossibly tiny, through the comms earpiece tucked into my ear. "Lobby level clear. You've got a clear path to the west corridor. But watch the cameras. They're on a 90-second sweep." We moved through the echoing, marble-floored hallways. They felt like a museum after hours, sterile and unnervingly quiet. As we approached the first security camera, its red light blinking with metronomic indifference, a small, mirrored panel descended from a ceiling tile just ahead of it, held by a thin, steady wire. The camera's lens now saw only a reflection of the empty hallway behind it. "Nice work, Anchor," Dorian murmured. We continued this way, a silent, surreal ballet of movement and reflection, until we reached a long gallery. This wasn't part of the corporate offices. The walls were painted a soft, calming blue, and they were lined with professionally shot black and white photographs. It was a showcase for one of Slate's flagship charities, the Fjord Light Children's Fund. I stopped. One photograph held me captive. It was a group of kids, no older than 10, laughing on the steps of a community center. They were residents of Harbor Finch. I recognized Maria's toddler, his face bright with a gap-toothed grin. My carefully constructed professional calm fractured. These were the lives in the balance. This was the human cost of a budget adjustment. "If Vireo falls," I whispered, my voice thick, "where do they go?" A warm hand settled on the small of my back. Dorian was beside me, his gaze on the photo, then on me. "We are not going to let that happen," he said, his voice a low, fierce promise. The simple, declarative statement was more reassuring than 1,000 empty platitudes. He gave my back a gentle squeeze, a silent command to keep moving, and we continued. The sub-basement was cold, the air tasting of chilled, recycled air and concrete dust, and there it was, the slate vault. It wasn't a door, it was a seamless wall of brushed steel, broken only by a small, glowing speaker grill and a biometric scanner. Voice print and retinal scan. Milo reported through the comms, triple encrypted. The access profile we need belongs to the head of security, a man named Fisk. I've got his retinal data from his driver's license, but the voice print is live. It requires a randomized passphrase. "I can do it," I said, opening the heavy case we'd been carrying. Inside was a high-spec laptop. I've been working on a voice synthesis model. I can pull Fisk's voice from his public interviews, feed it into the AI, and have it generate the passphrase in his voice. Dorian looked at the setup, then at the vault door. He was quiet for a long moment. "No," he said finally. "What, Dorian? This will work," I argued. "It's a digital ghosting," he said, his eyes fixed on the door. "It leaves a trace, a data signature that can be found. There's a cleaner way." He looked at me. "The blueprints you saw for this place. Was there a device recovery room nearby?" I blinked, pulling the building's layout from my memory. "Yes, room B11, for retrieving data from damaged hardware." "Why?" "Because a system this secure has a physical override," he said. "A failsafe, in case the biometrics fail during a fire or a power outage. It won't be a key. It'll be a service chip, stored somewhere secure but accessible. It'll be in that room. It was a massive risk, a complete deviation from our plan, but I saw the logic in his eyes. He trusted the physical world levers, chips, and locks more than the ephemeral world of code. B11 was a standard office door with a simple electronic keypad. Milo, still in the ceiling above, bypassed it with a few clicks. The room was an electronic graveyard, shelves filled with smashed phones, water-damaged laptops, and scorched hard drives. "It'll be in the fireproof safe," Dorian said, pointing to a gray metal box in the corner. He looked at me. "Your turn." It wasn't a high-security safe. 10 minutes of tense, focused work with my picks, and I felt the telltale click. Inside, nestled in fire-retardant foam, was a small, silver chip, no bigger than a thumbnail. Back at the vault, Dorian inserted the chip into a nearly invisible slot below the biometric panel. The steel wall hissed, and a section of it slid silently aside. The inside was an Arctic tomb, bathed in the blue glow of server lights. Racks of drives hummed with a low, constant thrum. Along one wall were rows of climate-controlled, individually locked deposit boxes. Fisk's project designation was B13, I said, my heart starting to pound. Dorian used the chip again on the corresponding lock. The small door swung open. Inside was a single, black external hard drive. My hands were shaking as I plugged it into my laptop. And there it was, the original. Unmodified architectural plans for Vireo Heights. I clicked open the revision history. A single entry, dated 8 months ago, stood out. Per G. Directive. Revise rebar specifications for columns C5 through C12. See attached budget adjustment memo. We had him. We had it all. A wave of triumphant relief washed over me. That's when the room was flooded with strobing red lights, and a piercing alarm screamed to life. My blood turned to ice. On a large monitor on the far wall, a face flickered into view. It was a woman with high cheekbones, eyes the color of ice, and a smile that was all predator. Irina Volkova. "Thank you for your assistance," she said, her voice smooth and laced with mocking amusement. The camera feed showed she was somewhere else, watching us remotely. "I was having such a difficult time getting past Fisk's security. You've been a most effective key." She smiled that terrible smile again. "I'll take it from here. Silver Point isn't big enough for 2 sharks in the same water. Dorian." The monitor went black. "She played us!" Dorian snarled, grabbing the drive. "She triggered a silent alarm the moment the vault was breached. We're a diversion for her own team. Let's go now." We didn't go back the way we came. Dorian led me to an industrial maintenance hatch in the floor. "Industrial disposal," he yelled over the alarm. He wrenched it open. Below was a vertical tunnel of polished steel, smelling of disinfectant and decay. He didn't hesitate. He grabbed me and jumped. We tumbled down the chute, a chaotic, disorienting fall in total darkness, landing with a bone-jarring thud in a mountain of plastic bags. The air was thick with the sickly sweet smell of discarded food and cleaning chemicals. We were in a large, clean dumpster in the loading bay. For a moment, we just lay there in the heap of trash, gasping for air, the alarm a distant shriek, then a hysterical laugh bubbled up out of my chest. The absurdity of it all, the heist, the betrayal, the escape into a garbage truck, it was too much. Dorian looked over at me, his face smudged with grime, and a reluctant, genuine smile broke through his grim expression. The relief, the adrenaline, the proximity, it was a combustible combination. The space between us collapsed. The kiss was nothing like the ones before. It was messy and desperate, a collision of teeth and lips. It tasted of sweat and fear and the metallic tang of adrenaline. My hands tangled in his hair, pulling him closer, and his arms wrapped around me, lifting me out of the trash and against him. He broke away first, breathing hard, his forehead pressed against my neck. I could feel the frantic, heavy beat of his pulse against my skin. "Wait!" he rasped, his voice thick. "Wait until we're safe." An hour later, showered and changed, we stood on a deserted pier overlooking the harbor. The rain had finally stopped. The air was washed clean, and the first hints of dawn were painting the eastern sky in shades of gray and lavender. Agent Lyra Quinn stood before us, a lone figure in a sensible trench coat, her face serious, her eyes sharp. I handed her the hard drive. "It's all there," I said. "The original plans, the revision logs, the memo, everything." She took it, her expression unreadable. "This is more than I ever hoped to get," she said. "With this, I can get a warrant. I can start kicking down doors." She looked from me to Dorian, a flicker of professional curiosity in her eyes. "But you need to understand something. I ran the data you sent me from the Vireo site through my internal channels. Within an hour, I got a call from a deputy director at the Bureau telling me to stand down, that the case was being handled. The leak isn't just a rumor. It's real. They know someone is coming for them." She took a step closer, her voice dropping. "You have a target on your backs. My best advice, take this win and disappear. Leave Silver Point before the sun comes up. Don't look back." I looked at Dorian. This was our chance. We had the evidence. We could run. Start over somewhere else. But Dorian was looking past me, toward the distant, sleeping silhouette of Harbor Finch. He had a choice: save himself, or save them. The man who had once been a student of architecture, who dreamed of building things, made his decision. "No," he said, his voice quiet but absolute. "Slade is planning a controlled demolition. He's going to use it to cover his tracks. Before he does that, we're getting those people out." The night that followed was a lifetime. There was no sleep, only motion. The Marlin Circle, it turned out, was more than an organization. It was an organism, one that Dorian could command with a whisper. A fleet of refrigerated trucks, the kind that usually hauled tuna and mackerel from the morning catch, rumbled to life across the city. Their official manifests were for an early morning seafood shipment. Their real cargo was human lives. We descended on Harbor Finch not as a gang, but as a rescue operation. The air, already thick with the damp chill of the coming dawn, filled with the low growl of diesel engines and the faint, incongruous smell of brine. I moved through the hastily assembled crowd in the community courtyard, my SPHA vest now a symbol of trust, not betrayal. I found the woman who was the true heart of this place, a stout, gray-haired woman named Vera, who ran the community kitchen and knew every family, every child, every ailment. "We have to be fast," I told her, my voice low and urgent. "They're planning to bring the building down. We have to get everyone out, now." She looked at me, her eyes sharp and assessing, then at Dorian, who stood a few paces back, a silent, imposing shadow directing his men with quiet hand signals. She saw not a gangster, but a commander. She nodded once. Her decision made. "Medicines," she said, her voice a gravelly command, "and papers. Get Mrs. Petrov's shoebox and the Gonzalez baby's asthma pump. Go." What followed was a controlled, frantic exodus. I ran from door to door with Vera, gathering pill bottles and immigration documents. I saw the faces of the people I was trying to save, not as data points, but as terrified humans. Young fathers clutched sleeping children to their chests, their eyes a mixture of profound fear and a desperate, fragile trust in us. Mothers shushed crying babies, stuffing photo albums and worn teddy bears into plastic bags. They moved with the silent speed of people who had been displaced before, who knew how to pack a life into a single bag in under 5 minutes. We packed them into the cold, dark trucks, huddled together on the metal floors between empty fish crates. The smell of fear was stronger than the smell of the sea. The convoy began to roll out, a silent gray serpent winding its way through the pre-dawn streets. I was in the last truck, a large semi-cab, with Dorian at the wheel. Just as we thought we were clear, a series of flashing red and blue lights appeared ahead, cutting through the gloom, a Moru checkpoint. They had anticipated a move. My heart seized. We were trapped. "Hold on," Dorian said, his voice a low, calm rumble. He keyed his comms. "Beacon, it's your show." Copy that. Helm? Teresa's voice crackled back. Give him a light show. I didn't understand. Then, a block ahead of the checkpoint, a streetlight flickered, then another. Then a whole series of them began to flash in a chaotic, unsynchronized rhythm, strobing erratically. The effect was disorienting, a sickening, seizure-inducing pulse of light and shadow. The Moru guards were confused, shielding their eyes, their commands turning into shouts of confusion over their radios. It was a manufactured electrical fault, a simple but brilliant piece of chaos engineering. In that moment of engineered blindness, our convoy, lights off, slipped through a dark side street and bypassed the checkpoint completely. As we merged onto the main causeway, Dorian turned on the truck's radio, keeping the volume low. A news bulletin was just beginning. Sources from the Silver Point Housing Authority are citing a sudden and aggressive outbreak of a toxic black mold discovered during a late-night inspection of the Vireo Heights residential tower. The announcer's voice said, crisp and professional, "For the safety of the public, the Slate Horizon Foundation has volunteered to fund an emergency, round-the-clock demolition of the compromised structure set to begin within the next 48 hours. A cover story. Plausible, terrifying, and absolute. They were going to erase their crime from the skyline, and the city would thank them for it. We arrived at our destination as the first pale light of dawn bruised the sky. Gullwind Warehouse was even bigger than Eider, an old cannery that sat on a crumbling pier jutting out into the bay. The air was sharp with the cry of gulls and the smell of low tide. As the families began to disembark, a wave of exhaustion so profound it felt like a physical blow hit me. My legs gave out. I didn't fall. Dorian was there, catching me before I hit the ground, scooping me up into his arms as if I weighed nothing. The last thing I remember was the feeling of his strong arms around me, the rough texture of his jacket against my cheek, and the sound of his heart beating a steady, reassuring rhythm next to my ear. I woke up hours later on a simple cot in a small, windowless office. Someone had covered me with a thick wool blanket. My hair, which had been in a tight, functional ponytail, was loose around my shoulders. I sat up and saw Dorian sitting in a chair across the room, watching me. The hard hat and contractor's jacket were gone. He just looked like a man, tired and burdened. "I untied your hair," he said, his voice soft. It looked uncomfortable. He held up his hand, and for the first time, I saw it, a slight, almost imperceptible tremor in his fingers. It was the first crack I'd ever seen in his armor of perfect control. It was the physical manifestation of his fear, not for himself, but for me. The realization was more intimate than any kiss. We didn't leave that room. As the day faded into another long night, Milo and Teresa brought us food and coffee. We were in a pocket of stillness while the world outside spun into chaos. We lay on opposite cots, separated by a few feet of cold concrete floor, and we talked. He told me about his childhood, about sitting on the end of these very piers with a sketchbook, long before they belonged to his family, trying to capture the impossible geometry of the cranes and the majesty of the container ships. He didn't want to be a gangster. He wanted to build bridges. I told him why I'd chosen urban planning, that I believed a city's soul wasn't in its skyscrapers, but in its public squares and neighborhood parks, the places where people connected. We talked until the sky outside the office door began to lighten, sharing the ghosts of the lives we might have lived, finding the common ground in the city we both, in our own ways, loved. The buzz of a phone on the crate between us was a violent intrusion. It was Dorian's. He looked at the screen, and the fragile piece of the room shattered, a muscle in his jaw clenched. "What is it?" I asked, sitting up. He didn't answer. He just turned the phone so I could see the screen. It was a photo. June. She was in Astor and Cole, tied to the very chair I had sat in. Her lip was split, and her eyes were wide with terror. Behind her, holding a knife to her throat, was Irina Volkova. Beneath the photo was a simple text message. "The intern for the waitress. A fair trade. You have 3 hours. Come alone." A cold, clarifying rage swept through me. This was my fault. June was innocent. I'm going, I said, scrambling to my feet. This ends with me. I'll turn myself in. Dorian was instantly in front of me, his hands on my shoulders, his grip firm. He looked directly into my eyes, his own gaze a force of absolute certainty. No, he said. We're going. I'm going with you. Every entrance, every exit, every possible line of sight in that restaurant, I've already planned for it. He wasn't asking, he was stating a fact. He released me and pulled out his own phone. He dialed, then put it on speaker, holding it out for me to hear. It went to voicemail. Lyra, he said, his voice low and clear. It's me. We have a situation. Irina Volkova has a hostage at Astor and Cole. Kasia and I are going in. If you don't hear from us in 3 hours, release everything. Burn them to the ground. He hung up. It was a dead man's switch, a last will and testament. We walked to the warehouse door, the gray morning light flooding in, before we stepped out into it, before we walked back into the storm. I reached out and grabbed the front of his shirt, pulling him to a stop. Words were useless now, hollow and inadequate for the terror and the desperate, aching thing that had taken root in my heart. I pulled his face down to mine and kissed him. It wasn't soft or questioning. It wasn't fueled by adrenaline. It was a deep, searing kiss of desperation and belonging, a frantic attempt to say everything that couldn't be said. His arms wrapped around my back, pulling me tight against him, holding me as if he could absorb me into himself, keep me safe there. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless. I looked up into his stormy gray eyes, and my voice was a raw whisper. Come back! The drive to Astor and Cole was a silent scream. Every red light was a lifetime. Every passing car a potential threat. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic prisoner. Dorian drove with an unearthly calm, his focus absolute, his hands steady on the wheel. He hadn't said a word since my whispered, "Come back." He didn't need to. His presence was a solid, physical promise. The bistro looked wrong, dead. The cheerful yellow awning was still there, but the windows were dark, the heavy velvet curtains drawn against the morning light. The open sign was off. It felt like a funeral home. Milo's voice came through my earpiece, a tiny, tinny whisper. Helm, I'm in. Bypass the alarm system. They're in the main dining room, just the 3 of them. I'm monitoring their comms. And they have a video feed running, a small digital camera, aimed at the hostage chair. It's plugged into the wall socket by the bar. Copy, Dorian murmured. He parked a block away. We didn't run to the door, we walked. Every step was a conscious effort to project calm, to deny the predator the thrill of our fear. Dorian pushed the oak door open. It swung inward on silent, well-oiled hinges. The smell of stale coffee and fear hit me first. The room was dark, save for a single beam of light from a portable work lamp on the bar, aimed at the center table, my table. Irina Volkova sat where Dorian had sat, looking perfectly at ease, as if she were waiting for her scallops, and in the chair where I had been stood up. June was bound, or her hands were zip-tied to the armrests, her ankles to the legs, her lip was split and swollen, a dark line of dried blood crusting at the corner of her mouth. But as our eyes met, she did something extraordinary. She gave me a tiny, almost imperceptible wink. I'm okay. That small gesture of defiance, of strength, was like a shot of steel to my spine. The happy couple, Irina crooned, her voice echoing slightly in the empty room. Come to pay the bill. Please, sit. She gestured with the knife, a long, thin blade that she lazily tapped against the rim of a water glass. We didn't sit. We stood in the open, halfway between the door and her table. This is between you and me, Irina, Dorian said, his voice level. Let the girl go. She has nothing to do with this. Irina laughed, a sound like glass breaking. She has everything to do with this. She's the leverage. You see, Dorian, you and I, we're sharks. We understand each other, but this, she gestured at me. This is a new variable. You've gotten soft, and Slate. Slate doesn't like variables, and he really doesn't like paying his bills. Dorian took a slow, deliberate step forward. He placed his phone on the table closest to him, the dark screen reflecting the single work light. Gideon Slate is a problem we both share, Irina. He pressed a button on the side of his phone. The screen lit up, and a voice filled the room. A new voice. Agent Lyra Quinn's. And this draft warrant, Lyra's voice said, crisp and professional, devoid of emotion. Be prepared for the immediate arrest of Gideon Slate on charges including, but not limited to, conspiracy to commit fraud, wire fraud, and reckless endangerment pending the full attestation of the data recovered from the Slate vault. It was a recording. The dead man's switch. Dorian was playing his hand. It was a psychological grenade meant to show Irina that the game was already over, that Slate was going down, and that she was on the losing side. Irina's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. Then she recovered, her eyes hardening into icy chips. She moved the knife from the glass and pressed the flat of the blade against June's throat. June squeezed her eyes shut, her brave facade crumbling. A draft warrant, Irina sneered. That's your move. A piece of paper that will never see a judge's signature. Lyra Quinn is a ghost, and you know it. Slate owns the bureau. She looked at me, her gaze pure venom. No, the price has changed. I don't just want you. I want a confession. She pointed to the small camera on the bar. A tiny red light was glowing. Miss Reed, you are going to look into that camera and you are going to confess. You will state that you falsified your report, that you acted out of malice, that you intentionally created a public panic to leverage a job offer from a competing firm. She smiled. It's a good story, plausible, sad. My mind raced. This was her exit strategy. This video would discredit me forever, making the data we stole inadmissible. It would destroy Lyra's case, and, more importantly, it would give Irina something to sell back to Gideon Slate, proof that she had handled the problem. This was my moment. This was my negotiation. I took a step forward, my hands raised slightly, palms out. Okay, I said, my voice trembling just enough to sound real. Okay, I'll do it. Dorian's head snapped toward me, his eyes flashing a warning. I ignored him. But not like that, I continued, walking slowly toward Irina. If I do this, you have to give me something. You're in no position to bargain, little girl, Irina hissed, pressing the knife harder. A tiny bead of blood welled up on June's neck. Yes, I am, I said, my voice gaining strength. You're right, you and Dorian are sharks. But you know what Gideon Slate thinks you're just a minnow. He's using you to do his dirty work, and you know he's going to cut you loose the second it's done. You know he's not paying you enough for this. Irina's eyes narrowed. I had hit a nerve. Here's my offer, I said, stopping just out of her reach. Let June go. Now, just push her chair toward the door. In exchange, I'll make my statement, but I won't say I lied. I'll say I made a mistake, a procedural error, that I filed the report through the wrong channels and I regret the panic it caused. I leaned in, dropping my voice. And then, I'll say that I was pressured into it, that my SPHA superiors were being paid by Gideon Slate's foundation to find fault with the building so he could buy it. I'll give you a different villain, one we both want. I was offering her a masterpiece, a confession that still implicated Slate, giving her leverage over him while simultaneously destroying my own credibility. It was a complex, tempting, and utterly poisoned gift. Irina stared at me, her mind clearly working, weighing the options. Dorian sighed, a sound of profound defeat. He ran a hand through his hair. Irina, he said, his voice suddenly tired, just let the waitress go. We'll do the video, whatever you want. It was the feint, the calculated display of weakness. He was giving her the victory. Irina's smile returned, slow and triumphant. She had won. She had broken us both. Fine, she said. A smart girl, after all. She looked at the camera on the bar, as if to check her angle, to prepare for her moment of triumph. Let's make sure this is... The red light on the camera went out. Irina frowned, her focus shifting for a single, fatal second. What? Now, June, I screamed. June didn't hesitate. She threw her entire body weight backward, the chair legs scraping with a violent shriek. The chair toppled, pulling her out of the knife's path. Irina lunged, enraged, but Dorian was already moving. He wasn't a man. He was a blur, a predator uncoiled. He crossed the space in a single bound. He didn't punch her. He didn't strike her. He simply caught her wrist, the one with the knife, in an iron grip. There was a sharp twist, a sound of sinew stretched too far, and a cry of pain from Irina. The knife spun free from her grasp and embedded itself, quivering in the thick oak of the table. Thud. The entire confrontation, from the light going out to the knife in the table, took less than 2 seconds. I ran to June, fumbling with the zip tie on her wrist. My hands were shaking so badly I couldn't get it. Dorian was there, a small, flat cutting tool in his hand. He sliced through the plastic bindings, and June was free. I pulled her up, grabbing her in a fierce hug, my face buried in her hair. June, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry. She pushed me back, her hands on my shoulders, her eyes blazing despite the tears. Don't, she choked out. Don't you dare apologize for saving me, ever. At that exact moment, sirens, real ones, wailed to life, shockingly close. They weren't approaching, they had arrived. The front doors of the bistro burst open, flooding the room with daylight. But it wasn't Lyra Quinn, it wasn't the police. It was Gideon Slate. He stood there, immaculate in a cashmere topcoat, flanked by 2 sharp-faced lawyers. Behind him, a man held up a phone, its camera live, streaming to the world. Slate's face was a mask of practiced, paternal concern. "My God," he said, his voice booming with false emotion. "What is happening here? I received an anonymous tip about a disturbance, Mr. Marchese, Miss Reed. Are you holding these women against their will?" My mind went blank. This was a nightmare. He was spinning it. He was twisting the entire narrative, painting us as the villains, himself as the concerned citizen, the hero. I looked at Dorian, my panic rising, but he wasn't looking at Slate's lawyers. He wasn't looking at the camera. He was looking at Slate's mouth. He was perfectly calm, almost relaxed, and he was listening. "I am appalled," Slate continued, stepping into the room, "to find that these criminal elements, led by Dorian Marchese, have apparently taken Miss Volkova and this poor waitress hostage, all in a desperate attempt to lend credibility to Miss Reed's slanderous and fabricated reports." And then I understood the entire, elaborate, terrifying ordeal. It wasn't about winning a fight with Irina. It was never about that. It was about this. It was about getting Gideon Slate, the untouchable philanthropist, to step out from behind his wall of lawyers and plausible deniability. It was about getting him on camera, in his own words, acknowledging the report, acknowledging me, acknowledging Irina, and lying about all of it. "Milo," Dorian said, his voice barely a whisper. "Did you get that?" Every single self-incriminating word. "Helm," Milo's voice whispered back in my ear. "Lyra has it all. The feed is clean. Get out. I'm looping the building's external security feed for the next 5 minutes. Go now." Dorian turned to me and June. "Let's go." He didn't run. He just turned and walked. He put a protective arm around June, and I walked on his other side. "Mr. Marchese, you're not going anywhere," one of the lawyers snapped, stepping forward. Dorian didn't even stop. "We are," he said, his voice flat and cold. "We were just leaving. Mr. Slate, thank you for stopping by. Your timing, as always, is impeccable. You can handle the press." We walked right past them. Slate, caught in the middle of his own live stream, couldn't stop us without looking like he was detaining us. His face, for a split second, was a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. He knew he'd been played. We walked out into the bright morning sun, leaving Slate and his team in the dark bistro with a furious, disarmed Irina Volkova. We were almost to the car when a low, hissed voice cut through the air. "Reed." I turned. Irina was at the door, held back by one of Slate's men. Her face was a contortion of rage. "It doesn't matter," she spat, her voice a raw whisper that carried across the pavement. "It doesn't matter what you have. Tomorrow night, Vireo falls. You're too late." Irina's words were a death sentence with a deadline. Tomorrow night. The phrase echoed in the cavernous space of Gullwind Warehouse, a ticking clock that measured the remaining hours of hundreds of lives. Lyra Quinn's voice over the speakerphone was strained, frustrated. "I'm trying, Dorian, but he's insulated. He's got a judge on his payroll who just rubber-stamped an emergency health order. The toxic mold story is impenetrable. Legally. My hands are tied for at least 36 hours. By then, it'll be a pile of rubble." The air in the office was thick with a sense of impending doom. I was looking at a satellite image of Vireo Heights on Milo's laptop, cross-referencing it with the original structural plans. My mind, trained to see stress loads and material tolerances, was running a different kind of calculation. "She wasn't lying," I said, my voice quiet, cutting through the heavy silence. Everyone turned to look at me. Slate isn't just going to demolish the building. He's going to make it look like an accident within the demolition. I pointed to the screen. His controlled demolition plan calls for charges to be placed on the eastern wing, the part that's already been condemned and cleared. It's supposed to fold in on itself, but the charges he needs to do that, if placed precisely, the shock wave, the seismic vibration through the compromised foundation. It will be enough to trigger a catastrophic failure in the occupied western wing. "He'll collapse the entire building," Dorian finished, his voice a low growl. "And his official report will say the unexpected collapse was due to the very structural instability he was trying to safely contain. He'll be a hero twice over, once for trying to save it, and again for rebuilding it. It was a perfect, monstrous plan. We were out of legal options. We were out of time." Dorian looked at me, his gray eyes searching mine. "There's only one way," he said. "We can't stop the demolition, but we can stop the detonation." He turned to the others. "He'll have a central trigger, a command panel to initiate the sequence. We go in. We cut the connection." "It'll be on the roof," I said immediately, my mind already there. "It has to be, for the wireless receivers on the charges, but the building is dying. Dorian, it's groaning under its own weight, the wind shear at that height. It'll be tearing at the loose panels. It's a suicide mission." "Then we need someone who understands the schematics," Milo said grimly. "Someone who knows where to step and where the floor is about to give way." All eyes turned to me. The fear was a cold, coiling thing in my gut, but beneath it, there was something else. A hard, unyielding certainty. This was my city. This was my profession. My name was on the report that started all of this. My conscience wouldn't let me send anyone else. "I'll do it," I said, my voice clear and steady. Dorian didn't argue. He didn't try to protect me. He simply nodded, accepting my choice as an equal. "I'm going with you," he stated. It was not a question. "I'll be your shadow." The final assault was a three-pronged spear aimed at the building's heart. At midnight, Teresa, positioned in a van 2 blocks away, activated a wide-spectrum signal jammer, turning the entire area into a communications black hole for Moru. At the same time, Milo rappelled down the main elevator shaft, the one part of the building that was a straight, unimpeded drop, and set up our only way in a high-tension zip line from the top of the elevator car to a broken window on the roof's maintenance housing. Dorian and I went last, hooked together on the same line. We launched ourselves from the darkness of the shaft into the howling wind of the open sky. The city lights spun crazily below us as we shot across the void. We landed hard inside the maintenance shed, the wind screaming through the broken window, trying to tear us back out. The roof was a vision from hell. The wind was a physical force, carrying with it a scouring blast of concrete dust that stung my eyes and coated my tongue. Loose steel panels shrieked and groaned. The entire structure felt like it was breathing, each groan a death rattle. Dorian stayed right behind me, a silent, steady presence. He was my anchor in the storm. I moved slowly, my hands braced against the buckled roof membrane, my mind a living blueprint. Step here. The support beam is solid. Avoid that section. The decking is compromised. My gloved hands were scraped raw on the rough concrete, but I barely felt it. This was my work. The city was my canvas, and I would not let this monster tear a hole in it. We reached the detonation control panel, a heavy steel box bolted to the base of the main communication antenna. As my fingers found the lock, a voice, amplified and distorted, boomed across the rooftop, cutting through the howl of the wind. "The two little dreamers," Gideon Slate's voice mocked, broadcast from the site's PA system. "Come to save the city's trash. It's touching, really, but you're too late." He knew. He was watching. The realization sent a fresh spike of fear through me. This was no longer just a race against time. It was a personal battle. I fumbled with my tools, my fingers suddenly clumsy. Dorian's hand closed over mine, stilling their tremor. He moved in front of me, shielding my body from the worst of the wind with his own. He took off his gloves and placed his bare hands on my face, his thumbs gently stroking my cheekbones. He leaned in until his lips were next to my ear. "If this is the end, Cassia," he whispered, his voice a raw, intimate thing against the storm, "I choose to end it with you." He pulled back and kissed me. It was a kiss of profound and devastating clarity. There was no desperation, no adrenaline. It was a clean, pure flame in the heart of the hurricane, a transfer of every ounce of strength and resolve he possessed directly into me. It was a promise of a future we might not have, and it was everything. The fire of his kiss burned away my fear. I turned back to the panel. My hands were steady now. The lock clicked open. I pulled the panel door aside and stared at the complex web of wires. I knew what to do. I pulled my wire cutters and began to sever the connections, rerouting the primary ignition circuit into a dead-end loop. "Done?" I gasped, my voice snatched away by the wind. "Why, it's not working," Teresa's voice screamed in our earpieces, tinny and frantic. "I'm reading a new signal." He rerouted the countdown. It's been transferred to a secondary, hardwired control panel. The signal is coming from the 5th floor, the gym. The gym, the most unstable point in the entire building. The concrete slab that was already screaming under the strain. It was a death trap. We didn't have time to think. We ran, scrambling for the roof access door. We plunged down a flight of emergency stairs, the metal groaning under our feet. We emerged onto a scene of active destruction. The building was coming apart around us. We sprinted down a broken, stationary escalator. A support beam above us cracked with a sound like a gunshot, showering us with concrete dust. With a roar, a huge section of the ceiling gave way. Dorian tackled me, throwing us both to the ground behind a large marble planter just as a massive pane of glass from a storefront imploded, sending a storm of glittering shards across the floor where we had just been. He pushed himself up, his face inches from mine. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine." I coughed, spitting dust. Then I saw it, a thin line of blood trickling from his temple, where a piece of flying debris had grazed him. My heart constricted. Without thinking, I reached up, my thumb gently wiping the blood away. I looked into his eyes, into the eye of his own personal storm, and I gave him his own words back, my voice fierce and desperate. "Live," I said, "then love." I kissed him, a quick, hard, desperate press of my lips to his, a promise sealed in dust and danger. We were up and running again. The gym was a wreck, its floor buckled, its mirrored walls shattered, and there, on the far wall, was the secondary panel, a small, blinking red light counting down the final seconds. 10, 9, 8. We sprinted across the unstable floor. The panel was sealed, but a thick bundle of armored cables ran out from the bottom. 5, then 4. "We can't open it," I yelled. "We don't have to," Dorian roared. He braced his feet, grabbed the thick cable with both hands, and pulled, every muscle in his body strained, his face a mask of raw effort. I grabbed on with him, adding my own weight, my own desperate strength. 3, 2. With a scream of tearing metal and a shower of sparks, the cable ripped free from the wall. 1. Silence. The building shuddered, a deep, foundational groan. A section of the eastern wing, far from us, collapsed with a deafening roar, but it was controlled. It folded in on itself, just as Slate's official plan had described. The rest of the building, our part, held. It was standing. The people were safe. We had won. We stood there, gasping for breath amidst the settling dust. A strange, secondary tremor shook the floor. We looked at each other, confused. Then, through a shattered fifth-floor window, we saw it. A plume of smoke and fire erupted from the empty lot next to Vireo Heights. A secondary explosion, smaller but deliberate. Someone had moved some of the charges. It wasn't a demolition, it was a message, a warning. The game wasn't over. The secondary explosion was not an attack. It was a punctuation mark at the end of Irina's threat. It was also a mistake. In her rage, she'd revealed her hand, Milo, a ghost in the city's digital infrastructure. Trace the detonation signal back to its source, a remote trigger activated from a yacht registered to a shell corporation of Gideon Slates, currently docked at Pier 13. He was running. The endgame was here. We didn't go in with guns blazing. Our weapon was the truth, and our battlefield was a cold, dark shipping container. Lyra Quinn, her face grim and set, sat before a bank of monitors. Milo had rigged a series of high-powered microphones and a long-lens camera, all aimed at the stern of Slate's gleaming white yacht. The horizon, the feed was being streamed directly, securely, to a laptop in front of a federal judge who was presiding over an emergency, sealed hearing. This was our one and only shot. The air in the container was cold, tasting of rust and salt. I sat beside Dorian. Our shoulders pressed together, a silent exchange of strength. We watched the monitor as if it were the only thing in the world. Gideon Slate was on the deck, a glass of something expensive in his hand. Looking out at the city he thought he owned, he was the picture of calm, a king surveying his kingdom. Then a second figure walked up the gangplank, Irina Volkova. She moved with a coiled, furious energy, her face a mask of betrayal. "The money, Gideon," her voice crackled through our speakers, sharp and clear. "You promised me payment upon demolition. The building is still standing." Slate chuckled, a low, condescending sound. "A technical difficulty, my dear. The intern and her pet gangster proved more resilient than anticipated. No matter, I still get my demolition order, and you still get your contracts. You'll get your money when the job is finished." "The deal is void," Irina snarled, taking a step closer. "You tried to set me up. You used them to get into your own vault. You were going to cut me out." Business is business," Slate said with a dismissive wave. He turned his back on her. "You should have controlled your people." "And you," she spat, "should have used enough steel in your columns." Slate froze. He turned back slowly, his mask of civility cracking. "That is not a subject for open discussion." "Isn't it?" Irina laughed, a bitter, sharp sound. "You think you can just walk away? I have copies of everything. The budget memos, the schematics. You are not leaving this pier until I am paid in full." Slate's arrogance finally boiled over. He took a step toward her, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper, forgetting. In his rage, the open air, the silent witnesses. "You have nothing. I am untouchable. Do you really think a few doctored papers matter? I will testify under oath that my controlled micro-charges were a last-ditch effort to contain a disaster caused by your shoddy construction. Your name is on the permits, my dear, not mine." My breath caught in my throat. He'd said it. He'd confessed. Beside me, Lyra pressed a key on her laptop. A small, green light blinked on. "The feed is now live in the courtroom," she whispered. On the yacht's deck, Slate's phone buzzed. He glanced at it. It was his lawyer, no doubt watching the hearing in horror. The blood drained from Gideon Slate's face. He looked around wildly, his eyes scanning the dark piers, the silent stacks of containers. He knew. He had walked right into the kill box. His eyes locked onto our container. It was impossible, but he knew. His composure shattered completely. With a guttural roar, he lunged, not at Irina, but down the gangplank, directly toward us. "It's a trap," he screamed to his Moru guards, who were positioned discreetly along the pier. The door to our container burst open. There was no time to run. Slate was on me in a second, his arm clamping around my throat, pulling me out into the harsh glare of the pier lights. He pressed something cold and hard against my temple. A gun. "Nobody moves," he shrieked, his voice raw with panic. He used me as a shield, his body pressed against my back. "We're walking out of here." Dorian stepped out of the container, his hands raised, empty. His face was a mask of cold, lethal fury, but his eyes were locked on mine, telling me to stay calm. "Let her go, Slate," Dorian said, his voice dangerously low. "Your game is over." "It's not over until I'm on that boat and halfway to international waters," Slate screamed, dragging me backward. "You want her, you can have her, but you come first." He gestured with the gun. "Take me. Let her go." It was the oldest trade in the world. From the deck of the yacht, Irina saw her opportunity, her money, her escape, her revenge. All of it was being threatened by a single, desperate man. She raised a small pistol she'd concealed in her jacket. Her target wasn't me. It was Gideon. A Moru guard saw the movement and opened fire. The world exploded. The single shot turned into a dozen as Moru reacted, firing wildly. Irina ducked behind a railing. The pier became a shooting gallery. My mind, however, was suddenly strangely clear. The chaos, the noise, the acoustics. I knew this place. The way the sound bounced off the water, the steel hulls of the ships, the concrete pilings. There was an old foghorn station at the end of the pier, used for emergencies. Its control panel was in the harbor master's kiosk, not 30 feet away. "The horn," I screamed, my voice raw. "Dorian, the foghorn!" He understood instantly. As Slate was distracted by the firefight, Dorian moved. He didn't run. He just dropped. He hit the deck, drew a weapon I hadn't even seen, and fired 2 precise shots that took out the floodlights above us, plunging the pier into a chaos of shadows and muzzle flashes. In that moment of disorientation, I stomped down hard on Slate's instep with my heel. He roared in pain, his grip loosening for a fraction of a second. It was enough. I tore myself free. Dorian was already moving, intercepting me, shoving me behind him, shielding me with his body just as Irina, seeing her chance, fired again. A hot, searing pain I didn't understand shot through me, but it wasn't mine. Dorian grunted, a sharp intake of breath, his body lurching against mine. He'd taken the bullet. For me. Just as the world was about to collapse into complete madness, a new sound cut through the gunfire, the deafening, soul-shaking blast of the harbor foghorn. It wasn't a single blast. It was a continuous, bone-rattling wave of sound, a physical force that hammered the eardrums and vibrated through the concrete. Milo. He got into the controls. Everyone on the pier was stunned, disoriented, clutching their heads. In that moment of sonic chaos, figures swarmed out of the darkness. Not Moru. These were professionals, dressed in black, with civic marshals stenciled on their backs. Lyra's team. They moved with silent, deadly efficiency, and the firefight was over in seconds. The foghorn died, leaving a ringing, blessed silence. Gideon Slate and Irina Volkova were on their knees, their hands cuffed behind their backs. The reign of terror was over. Then the rain began to fall, a heavy, cleansing downpour. I turned to Dorian. He was leaning against a piling, his hand pressed to his shoulder, blood seeping through his fingers. I rushed to him, my hands covering his. "You're hurt," I whispered, tears blurring with the rain on my face. He looked at me, a small, pained smile on his lips. "It's just a scratch." He looked down at my tear-streaked face, and his smile widened. "You owe me a normal dinner." I laughed, a choked, watery sound, and then he did something that stopped my heart. He slid down the piling onto one knee. The rain plastered his hair to his forehead, and his face was pale, but his eyes were filled with a light I had never seen before. He wasn't proposing, he was repenting. "Cassia," he said, his voice raw and earnest, "I pulled you into my storm. I put your life in danger. I have no right to ask you for anything, but I'm asking anyway. Give me the chance to build a safe city with you by your side." I reached down and took his hand. Pulling him back to his feet, I pulled him close, ignoring the blood, ignoring the pain, and I wrapped my arms around his neck. "Yes," I whispered against his lips. The kiss was everything. It was the rain, the salt of the sea, the burn of gunpowder, the relief of survival, and the terrifying, beautiful promise of a new beginning. It was long and deep and passionate, just lips and hands and breath, our foreheads pressed together, and from the shadows of the pier, from the assembled marshals and the dock workers who had emerged to watch, a sound started, quiet at first, then growing applause. The story of Vireo Heights became a symbol of Silver Point's rebirth. With Slate's assets frozen, a new civic fund was created, the Irene Harbor Fund. I was asked to co-supervise it, ensuring the money went back to the people. Vireo was retrofitted, reinforced, and the residents of Harbor Finch, led by a beaming Mrs. Petrov, returned home. The Marlin Circle, as it was, ceased to exist. In its place rose the Marcussi Logistics Cooperative, a fully legitimate, unionized enterprise that quickly became the lifeblood of the city's revitalized port. June, with a small business loan from the Irene Fund, reopened Astor and Cole. It was brighter, happier. And at our table, the one by the window, a small brass plaque was affixed to the wall. It read, "Reserved for those who know how to wait." Tonight, a year later, the city celebrated the grand opening of the Marchese Vocational Training Center. It was a beautiful building, all reclaimed timber and glass, a bridge of hope built on the very docks Dorian had once ruled with fear. He led me through the cheering crowd, past his entire crew, Milo, Teresa, Rook, all of them smiling, and took me to a quiet table set for two, our table. He took both my hands in his. "The first night we met," he said, his voice low, for my ears only. "I told you, live first, then love." He squeezed my hands, his gray eyes shining with a future I could finally see. "Tonight, Cassia Reed, I say let's live together and dare to love." The room erupted in applause, but I didn't hear it. I only heard him. I looked past his shoulder, out the large window. A light rain was falling, like paper confetti in the glow of the streetlights, and in the reflection on the glass, I saw us, and beyond us, the glittering, hopeful skyline of Silver Point, a city, and a promise that we had saved together. Thank you so much for listening to our story. I'd love to know where in the world you're tuning in from, so please drop a comment below and let's connect over our shared thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, Mafia Boss Stories, and give this video a like. And if you really enjoyed it, please consider hitting that hype button to help this story reach even more listeners. Your support means the world.